Hello and welcome to the Conference Board's webcast series, Beyond COVID-19. This is an in-depth look at our world, which is now in the grasp of this global pandemic, a deep recession, and growing civil unrest. Today's webcast is entitled, The Brand as the Ultimate Leadership Tool. I'm Steve Odland, CEO of the Conference Board, and joining us today are first John Chambers, who for 25 years served as CEO, Chairman, and Executive Chairman at Cisco Systems, and now is the founder and CEO of JC2 Ventures, where he focuses on helping disruptive startups from around the world build and scale. Also joining us today is Hampton Bridwell, the CEO and Managing Partner of Tenet Partners, a brand consulting firm that publishes the Top 100 Brands report and will share with us today some of its latest findings. And finally, the leader of the Conference Board's Marketing and Communications Center and our CMO, Chiqui, Cartagena. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Steve.
Pleasure, Steve.
All right, well, let's get started with engaging our audience today in a couple of poll questions. We are in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis. It has affected everybody, but the question for us is, how long will it last? So if I could have the first poll question on the screen, please. How long do you think, and this is a question for our audience, and you can vote on each one of these and submit it. How long do you think the COVID-19 pandemic will last? 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, or more? So this is, you can see the question on the screen, and we'll give it a minute here for our panel, or for our panelists are not voting, but for our participants to weigh in on how long you think it will last. I can't see the voting real time, so we'll just give it a little bit more. And let's do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and now we'll close the poll. And before we show the results on that, and I'll ask for our panelists to give some feedback on this, let's turn to poll question number 2. If you could put that question on the screen, please. And the question is, hold those results and come back to those, and let's put the second poll question up, please. The question is, how is your company dealing with the pandemic? Is your company in defense mode, or is your company in offense mode? Meaning, are they cutting back? Are they investing more in innovation and brand communications, or neither? You know, sort of sitting in the middle. Here again, the poll question is open for our audience to vote and tell us whether your company is in defense or offense, meaning cutting back or investing more, or maybe just in between. Again, we'll give that just a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, now go back and let's look at the in sequence. First of all, the answers to poll question number 1, if we could put those on the screen. How long is it going to last? Well, it looks like our audience thinks that majority of our audience thinks it's going to last for 12 months. No one thinks it's going to be over in just a few months. So it looks like the next year is, from our audience perspective, is going to be consuming us from a COVID perspective. Okay, now let's look at the results for poll question number 2. What mode is your company in? If you could share that on the screen. Well, this is really divided. So it looks like you know, roughly a third, a third, a third. So now let's open it up and turn to our panelists. And John, I'm going to start with you. How do you interpret these results from these 2 polls?
It's a little bit more optimistic on the second poll than I anticipated it would be. On the first one, I don't think anybody really knows. I started into this and I was very concerned in February, felt that we were headed into 3 to 5 quarter phenomena. And it always, as long as you think and deeper, and everybody said I was a pessimist, which I'm never called a pessimist, but they thought that was unrealistic. And most people thought it was going to be a quicker V and we were overreacting. Now you're seeing 12 to 24 months being the most likely scenario. And it's dependent upon a couple of variables, such as the vaccine and also what kind of crowd partial immunity we get in therapeutic drugs. So on the first one, in terms of spending, if you're in the IT industry. I like that number in terms of capability.
Yeah, now on the second one, John, it's split, but as we know, different sectors are reacting differently. There are certainly sectors like airlines and the travel industry that's just been walloped, and then other industries are benefiting. So maybe part of this is driven by the makeup of our respondents, huh?
I would agree. I think also, however, something that would be fun to talk about today is I see a certain number of companies that are in the most challenged industries, and they are going to leapfrog. They're going to, maybe 10 or 20% of them are going to say, rather than playing defense, even though I'm in the airline industry or hospitality or manufacturing, they're going to really make a jump to do a second IPO, digitize their company, and go for it. So I think it does vary by industry, but it also varies by strategy within the industry.
Yeah, and this is a key point, and it's really the theme of our webcast today, which is brand as the ultimate leadership tool. Hampton, your reaction to the poll questions?
Well, I see that most certainly across our clients. So our firm runs across many different industries, and so we have a client in aerospace, really struggling, difficult environment for them, and clients in med device and pharma, which are just booming. And so one of our clients made a robot that cleans hospitals, and they are selling like it's no tomorrow. So I think that's generally what we're experiencing is it's to some degree, I hate to be so extreme, but it's a winners and losers moment. And the way companies are reacting in these difficult situations, I think is interesting, because you're seeing leadership really step up, even if you're on the wrong side of this, what people are doing to really recast their futures.
Very interesting, and we are going to come back to this and turn to you later in the conversation. Chiqui, your reaction to the polls?
I'm with John here. I think and Hampton, leading brands are leaning in because they want to find a way to win. They're not scared about the moment. They're really trying to find the silver lining, whether they're in the winners group or the losers group. I think leading brands are going to continue to innovate and to find new ways to get through this. And in terms of the time length, I think the vaccine is the leader there. The economy will come after. People feel more confident. The consumer confidence increases. I know you're going to talk a lot more about that, Steve.
No, yeah. So it looks like we have consensus that that the leading brands and the leading companies and the winners are going to do something different and differentiating, and that's going to be based on the strength of their brand. Well, we're going to look at some informative discussion over the next hour or so, and the responsibility that the C-suite has in these challenging times. But just to set the stage, let's just spend a few minutes and look at the latest data published by the Conference Board regarding the U.S. Consumer Confidence Index, the Global Consumer Confidence Index, and then our CEO Confidence Index. So if you could put up the next slide, please. This is the U.S. Monthly Consumer Confidence Index. And the Conference Board's index increased in June after virtually no change in May, but it's really coming off of some lows here, as you can see, driven by the crisis. The index now stands at 98.1, which is up from about 86 in May. But pre-pandemic, it was 132 and a half. So this is really a change, and it seems to be kind of stabilizing just in the last month. The reopening of the economy and the relative improvement in unemployment claims helped consumers' assessment of the present day conditions, meaning what are we experiencing right this moment? But current economic conditions, as we know, remain weak. Looking ahead, consumers are a little less pessimistic about the short-term outlook than they were in May. But they don't foresee a big pickup in economic activity, and that's a little worrisome because, as we all know, the U.S. GDP is made up by 70% consumer spending. Faced with this uncertain and uneven path to recovery, a potential COVID-19 resurgence that people are projecting in the fall, it's probably too soon to say that the consumers have turned the corner and are ready to spend. So that's an interesting look at the consumer confidence in the US. Let's look at the next chart. And this is the Global Consumer Confidence Index. And I think what you see here is that deteriorating job prospects and rising anxieties drove a record drop in the global consumer confidence here in the second quarter, dropping from 106 rating in the first quarter to 92 in the second quarter. So as this crisis evolves into a demand-driven recession around the world, consumers are expected to remain pessimistic, and that's true in virtually all economies. Globally, and especially in emerging markets, the deteriorating job prospects and anxieties over personal finances drove confidence down. But even in mature markets like North America and Europe, you saw worsening job outlook. Latin America and Asia Pacific were a little bit different, and Asia's a little bit ahead. Remember, the COVID crisis hit there first, and they took action there first. Next chart, there really are three factors that are going to determine the recovery. One is the COVID containment. The second is the economic impact on household incomes. And then finally, citizens' trust in government policies. And you can see that the recovery will vary by region, and you can see consumer confidence differences by region. Because Asia Pacific was first, you see China and South Korea being successful in containing policies, and they began to open their economies again. Europe was a little bit all over the board. They were diverse in terms of how they handled the policy response, with Germany being most proactive, but other areas like Sweden being not very proactive in shutting things down. And so you see differences in Europe. In the Gulf Cooperation Council in North America, and especially Canada, you see the decline in oil prices really affecting things. So a lot of differences around the world. Let's turn to the final slide, and that's the CEO confidence. And you can see that over time, CEOs have been relatively predictive about the economic results. And here you see that CEOs are relatively grim about our current situation. This is not surprising. 7 in 10 CEOs expect that both the economy and their industry, however, will fare better in coming months, but we don't see it yet. So there's no short-term indication of what's going on here. And because of that, we don't see any expectations that CEOs will pick up in their investments. So now let's go back to our panel with these data and get some of these results. John, you and I have been CEOs for a long time. You've been here. You were running companies through 9/11 and SARS and Iraq War, the financial crisis. What are the similarities and differences between those crises which you managed through and the current situation?
I think many of the similarities exist, except that it's occurring much faster. I think this is my 6th financial crisis, not to date myself from an age perspective at all. And what I've realized more than anything else, you can use a very similar playbook each time for them in terms of how you address the market. The similarities are you gain market share during the downturns, whether you're a startup or a big player. They're probably 50% of the Fortune 500 won't exist in a decade. This is going to accelerate that. 70% of the startups won't exist in a decade. It's going to be even more brutal on the startups. And during the downturns, as always, when Cisco, we moved to take advantage of market transitions. My parents were doctors. They taught me to deal with the world the way it is, not the way you thought it was. So if you got an illness, you say, how do you capitalize on it? This one, however, will be enabled more by technology, the recovery, but also the impact on jobs from a negative perspective in terms of the productivity that goes with it. So artificial intelligence, the cybersecurity, the Internet of Things, big data, they're going to play a huge role in terms of the winners and losers company-wise. Your playbook, it hasn't changed. How much was external? How much was internal committed? Your 5 to 7 major plays you're going to run. Communicate it to your employees, your shareholders. Don't hide. Be transparent. Outline your North Star and get reports back. And then right now, if you've already made those changes, saying here's how we're going to break away, almost like a new IPO, if you will, where marketing can play a huge role on what the company's going to look like 3 and 4 years out, because the stock market clearly is not pricing in this year. They're pricing in where they think it will be 12, 24 months out. Marketing plays a huge role in that positioning.
And John, we've been talking for decades about the digital revolution and what is going to happen and so forth. And, we've been kind of working our way through this. You played a huge role in enabling this in your company at Cisco and personally in your innovation. But here we are, all of a sudden, within a matter of weeks, the entire world is working, in a virtual environment. how will this crisis change the world of work permanently?
I think it will be a blended version. And Steve, you said it right. We invented at Cisco telepresence, video conferencing, business to business back in 2006 after the Mexican bird flu pandemic, where I was down there with the president of Mexico when it broke. And yet its broad acceptance at the consumer level prevented it from being accepted by employees and by individuals around the world. Now everybody uses Zoom, everybody uses WebEx, Skype, Google Meets, etc. I'm not at the extreme that think everybody's going to work from home long term. I've already seen that movie. It works great the first 2 years or maybe 12 months. Then your productivity drops, your culture begins to break, etc. So I think it will be a blended version. But much like your comments about industries, it will vary by jobs within a company. Call centers with artificial intelligence will never return. That will be from home, remote. Your productivity will be very good. The agents won't turn over as quickly because of job experience will change in it, et cetera. But I think for the average person, I think it will be a mix of the two. And so I'm not of the school that says this is something that people will do 2 and 3 years out in total for companies.
Yeah, and you know, John, all the polls and all the research prior to this said that it was the baby boomers who loved being in the office because, you know, of they were stuck in the old paradigm and so forth. And it was the new generation that was the gig economy. And what we're finding now in this COVID environment, it's the millennials who want to be in the office. They miss the socialization and all that goes along with it. That's not what we predicted, is it?
No, it's not. But I'd like for each of us to think how often you've had somebody working 100% remotely and you were satisfied after 2 years with the results. Mm-hmm. It's no exception. It works well for a while, but a challenge. But I think the social stuff we miss, the technology, however, I think will help enable that in terms of it. I'd rather do a Zoom conference with 10 of you all and able to see all 10 of you at a time than I would be around a table where I could only focus on 1 or 2. And much like you're going to do today, you can present slides, inputs in ways you couldn't before. So I think there are a lot of productivity gains that are here to stay as well.
Yeah, well stated. Well, Hampton, this has been a big change for marketers as well, because you know, if you're in a winning industry, all of a sudden you've got more demand than you know what to do with. If you're in an industry that dependent on movement of people and physical attendance, well, you've been hurt. So how are the smart marketers reacting during this period?
Well, I think it starts with like understanding the baseline that we were all operating in. And, you know, 6 months ago, everything was going perfect and marketers could essentially depend on a set of an understanding of essentially what drove their business and attribution models to the revenue and on and on and on. And that has all been turned on its head pretty instantly, right? But what I see where some companies are really struggling, really the companies that are going to have a hard time making it through, is that they are still thinking that the world is going to come back immediately to everything that was driving their business before in terms of attributes, drivers of purchase, why they're loyal to their brand. And I think that is a giant trap for a lot of marketers as we're going forward. And the marketers that are actually doing an incredible job understand that everything is being reset, and they're using really advanced tools, specifically like machine learning, to be able to build models to predict the future of where demand is going to be, what is going to drive purchase, who's going to be your best customer. And, you know, the folks like Amazon and Netflix are using these advanced technologies in marketing to be able to really reach people in entirely new ways. And so I think that there's a group of marketers that have a playbook that they've used over decades, and I think they're going to be in trouble. And the marketers that are rewriting their playbooks for the future are the ones that are really doing an outstanding job right now.
Yeah, but Hampton, if I'm a marketer sitting in a company and I've been affected one way or the other, how do I know, how can I tell how much is permanent and how much to count on? I mean, And you know, how do I bet how long to do it the way I'm doing it, and then what the pivot's going to be? I mean, there's a lot of unknowns here. Of course, you know, there always are those unknowns, but in this period of time, these are sometimes existential kind of bets that marketers are being asked to make.
Well, of course, but I think there's two sides to this, and it's really important that companies are getting outside of their four walls or even the walls at home and really understanding what consumers are doing. Like, what are they thinking about? How are their lives changing? And executives need to like have insights to be working with, and ultimately I think that needs to be done more hands-on. The other is that most tools that marketers use look backwards. And in order to address this situation right now, you need tools that learn every day. So that's what machine learning is. It's what it does. And like our firm has embraced it fully to be able to connect many operational data sets with marketing inputs to be able to help leaders make decisions. And so machine learning allows for you to actually predict what will happen tomorrow based on real-time information. And that's what you need in order to survive right now, because it's going to change tomorrow. It's going to change a week from now. It's going to change a month and 12 months. And you know, so yeah, there's a vision that you need to have for what you're going to be at the end of this year and 5 and 10 years from now. But the other is that you need tools to really handle this situation. And as John pointed out, the speed at which it's all moving is beyond the toolkit that most companies are used to employing.
Yeah, but you know, it also requires that CMOs and other marketing folks be honest about it. You know, when things are going well and the top line is growing, it's always because marketers are brilliant. And when things are going south, it's always because, you know, it's the weather. But you know, in this case, there are companies experiencing tailwinds and headwinds, and there really needs to be a good diagnosis of what's happening so that they understand what it is that they're driving, and so they can do more of that and so forth. So that's, you know, so Chiqui, you've been a CMO for a long time and you've worked in a multicultural world. How does this crisis and, you know, all the confidence data that you see, how does that impact the multicultural marketing world?
Well, the multicultural marketing world is the one that's up and coming, right? It represents that younger generation. They're going to be the ones who form the new normal, right? The new normal is clearly digital. We're all digital natives. The new norm is really about forced adoption of, you know, previously ignored innovations like online shopping or telemedicine. But this goes beyond the multicultural, Steve. I think multicultural is the growth opportunity for many marketers in a tough time, and I encourage them to really think about that and think about how prepared they are to capitalize on that segment. But like Hampton was saying, who is your best customer? You know, if you're in the Pampers business, if you're in the business of selling that kind of stuff, 1 in 4 babies are born to Latinos alone, and an additional 2 to African-American households. So you've got to be focusing on those areas and on those segments, which, you know, have been sort of like given the, okay, I'll focus on that once, you know, once I get. But I think this provides an opportunity for to pivot, to grow, and to grow through very difficult times. But the new normal is going to be very different. You know, online, digital is king. It's here to stay. I agree with John on that. It's going to be hybrid. And I also see a silver lining with not only the Gen Zers, millennials and Gen Zers. I mean, the retail sector that is going to be so hard hit, right, because of all the online shopping, might have a silver lining with those Gen Zers who like the socialization that you were referring to earlier, Steve.
Well, in this period of time, Chiqui, what changes are you seeing from the multicultural segments, or are there any? Are there behavioral differences in the Hispanic community and the African American community? You know, have they pivoted and changed behavior, and what does that mean for marketers now?
All consumers are pivoting and changing. Multicultural consumers happen to be Uber consumers, so you're going to see it more in those households. But they are changing in terms of their shopping behavior. They're changing in terms of their pessimism towards the economy. Obviously, multicultural people have been most affected by the health and lack of unemployment. And so you're going to see some behavioral changes. I don't think there are enough tools, right, for us to really sort of slice and dice multicultural segments yet, which is why I encourage everybody to do that consumer research Hampton was talking about. You've got to be close to your consumer now more than ever and really understand where you're going to win and who's going to be the lead to help you pull yourself out of this mud. But you know, consumers are changing, they're adapting, but I'm with John. I can't tell you what 12 months from now will look like. It's still too volatile.
Yeah, and but one thing you see in these periods of time is a seeking of value and value in every corner. The other thing is that, you know, cash flow is important, right? I mean,
Right.
Consumers right now are, regardless of where they are on the income spectrum, are hoarding cash a little bit because it's an unknown future here, and so you see them buying smaller portions and so forth. So these are things to keep in mind, you know, in all segments, as you say. But there are some distinct differences going on right now. Let me go back, John, to you. You know, this is you again have run. You ran Cisco. You ran one of the largest companies in the world through more crises than we can count. In fact, so many that you know, you have to start to wonder if it's you, John, and not something else. But just kidding. But tell us some of the mistakes that you made during these periods in time, and you know, it's some warnings for people trying to think through the situation now.
Well, just to give you the data to operate off of it, when you go from when I joined Cisco, 70 million in sales and 400 people, and left Cisco 20 some years later with $48 billion and 75,000 people, you think it's up to the right. It is not. We had major setbacks. Probably a third of them were self-inflicted, 2/3 were external. But on every setback, we had an attitude, this is when you gain market share. And so we tended to look for a market that was in transition, enabled by new technology. For us, the internet changed the way everybody worked. That was really cool. In an area like being a routing company, we saw switching take off, then voice over the internet. Each time there was a fundamental change, we went for it. The mistakes made by me and by others is it's a period of time you better disrupt or you get disrupted. There is nothing worse than doing the same thing too long. And both Hampton and Chiqui alerted to that. I referred to it in their comments on it. Artificial intelligence is one thing that I think will be like the internet was 20 years ago on changing businesses and consumer behavior when you come out of this. So I would look how artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to affect every aspect of your job. And to the point that we talked about on marketing, instead of data that is largely past, interactive data, and thinking about how do you remine the data from social media and the customer experience in a different way. Companies like Sprinkler that suddenly all of a sudden are able to say to Nike, somebody's about to run in a marathon, they're having them left on your website. They like your shoes, they're already talking about it to your friends, reach out to them. Or you've got a problem in quality coming as a computer company, they're already talking about the problem in quality. Your churn rate's going to go up unless you affect it. So I think it offers tremendous opportunities, but I think the destruction is going to be dramatic.
You know, John, I grew up in the marketing world in consumer products, and you taught me one of the greatest lessons in marketing that I ever learned from anyone. You know, Cisco and all of its products were thought of as ingredients. I come from the food industry. You were thought of as ingredients. They were components and so forth. And you put a brand on it. You put the Cisco brand on it, Cisco inside. You went on television, you screamed it, and everybody said, this is the strangest thing. Don't they know that they're an ingredient company? They're a component company. Why are they treating this like a brand? And yet you single-handedly changed the whole technology world, and I think the entire branding world with your moves.
Well, you're being very kind. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but you're right. We had one of the most valuable brands due to our marketing team who did a great job of helping position it in the industry. And brand to me is nothing more than track record, relationships, and trust. And so how you position that, I found it interesting on the data you saw earlier that India had one of the best rankings in terms of consumer confidence in the whole group, like 123. And I would argue that the reason they did that was purely because of their leaders, Prime Minister Modi outlining a digital economy future, dealing with the issue very candidly. And he's one of the best communicators, and candidly, while politicians don't like the word marketing, he is amazing at positioning the brand and changing it. And that's where leadership can have such a huge role over a country's future. And you look at how an emerging market like India with 1.3 billion people and compare it to Brazil, leadership does really change here, and how you use these positioning can play a key role in it.
We have a couple hundred people who are live here today, and I think for all of them, you know, if you remember nothing else from this conversation on brand and the power of brand in this period of time, remember this: marketing works. And John has proved it for decades, and I learned it over and over again. Hampton has taught it, and Chiqui has perfected it. It's really true. It doesn't matter if your brand is weak, if your brand is strong. Marketing works, and you can market your way through these things. And I think that's really the theme of what we're talking about today. Before I jump in and ask Hampton to share the top 100 brands report, I want to check in and see how our attendees the companies are reacting to the current events from a branding standpoint. If you put the next poll question up, here again, I'd like the audience to weigh in on the question of what is your company doing regarding the brand communications and advertising budgets during this period of time? Are your companies investing more? Are they maintaining the budgets the same? Or are they cutting back on advertising budgets? Here again, you've got it open for our audience to vote and tell us what your company is doing. Are they hunkering down and cutting back, or is it just kind of business as usual, or are they actually stepping up and using this time to invest more? Let's just give it, still have votes coming in. Let's just give it a few more minutes, a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, if you could put the results on the screen. Hampton, they're not listening to you.
No,
what's going on here?
Well, again, I think it ends up being that, you know, it's probably a broad sector that is in a space where they can just keep going. But I think that the companies that are investing more right now, that's an interesting and bold move. So yeah. McDonald's is, you know, one of those brands that's seeing weakness in its competitors, and it's, you know, doubling down on its advertising and doing everything it can to assert itself and to gain market share. And, you know, this is a brand for a couple of decades here that's really been, you know, trying to figure out where it's going to be. And I think as it settles into a stronger sense of its purpose, you know, across markets, they are using this to really go for it. So,
and I would add, Steve, that
the other thing I would say is, that you know, when a CMO is standing in front of his CFO and CMO or CEO and CFO and having the conversation about investment, I think that the tools that they're using to have that conversation are not suited well. And so the cuts often are, or the, you know, decision to invest more is from the gut oftentimes, and that's a tough way to be able to do this and really capitalize.
Yeah, if you're going to run your business by your gut, your boss's gut is always going to win, right, John? So, so just the way. So, Chiqui, what's your reaction to this?
Yeah, no, I'm surprised that only 25% are cutting back, because marketing is the first place people look for savings, and as John has said, big mistake. I was interviewing the CEO of Clorox couple weeks ago, and he's investing, right? Another leading brand. And to Hampton's point, you know, I have a McKinsey quote. Right now, 51% of CFOs manage corporate strategy, according to McKinsey. So when the finance people are in charge of marketing, marketers really must do a much better job at speaking to the C-suite from a rational point of view, not a emotional point of view.
And you mean talking about financial payback on these investments? Well, you know, John, last word on this this survey. It's okay to invest more when you're making money hand over fist like Clorox during this period of time, but what about everybody else?
Well, this is where you actually have to be counterintuitive. You've got to say where you're going to get your payback and how does it occur. But you've got to realize how, if you're a marketeer and you're looking especially to the CFO, ideally to the CEO, about spending the money, you've got to understand the CEO's priority has changed. Just 6 months ago, their number one priority was growth, the faster the better. Number two was innovation. Number three, and it was a distant number three, was cost savings, productivity, and efficiency. It is now flipped. Number one was cost savings and efficiency. And like Chiqui, I was surprised. I would have guessed that number was 50%, because marketing is one of the few areas that is variable. And so it's easy to cost because you don't have to lay off people, and then you build it back. So I think it does speak to how well this audience, and it's a little bit like the choir. I think many people attending this are huge believers in marketing and have been effective on it. But I think the leverage here is tremendous to break away.
Yeah, John, there's a question from our audience. How much of CMOs are getting their budgets cut because of their inability to speak the language of the firm, which is finance, and the language of the CEO? What would you advise your CMO to do? How would you advise a CMO to talk to a CEO?
Well, first, I'm a salesperson by nature. Never assume what your customer or your target person you want to influence, what you think their needs are. Ask them. They'll tell you. And the CEO will tell you that their needs, most of them went from growth to cost savings. Anything you can do to help me on cost savings, the quicker the better. Anything you can help me with not having my customers churn, because that's the lowest dollar expense to not get churn for the best return on it. And anything you can do to help up. The CFO is almost always going to migrate to, tell me how much money you can save me. So you've got to say, how do you adjust your message to that, and how do you make a difference on it? So it's classic sales, if you will, in terms of what the marketing needs to do.
Yeah, great advice. Hampton, let's turn to your top 100 brands report. If you could go to the next slide and set up Hampton's presentation. He has a few slides to share with us on the top 100 report. This is an incredible report that Tenet has done over the last 25 years. It's tracked corporate brands through the longest longitudinal study of its kind. And obviously, if you're a CMO in this world, you've read the results of this report. But Hampton, carry it away.
Sure, thanks. Well, we're always so excited about this every time it comes out, but this particular period of time is really a bit mind-boggling, because we are in a moment that is so historic, it's really hard to fathom. You have a pandemic, an economic crisis, social unrest, all these things that are flowing around us, and brands are actually moving through this space, trying to figure out how they're going to adapt. And so it's a time of pretty incredible change. And this spurred us on to explore, what is it that brands are doing to be special in this moment. And a lot of what we were seeing was the discussion around essential. Essential became such a huge point of reference for everything that was happening in society at this particular moment. So we began to gravitate to this whole notion that brands, actually, the ones that were doing something really special, kind of reasserting their purpose, being really authentic to who they are, displaying enormous adaptability and agility, they were making the brand and their company essential at this moment. So if you go to the next slide, please. So, a lot of what we are experiencing at this moment is, I think that companies that have a real affinity for being able to understand their customers and be able to understand needs that are changing, to really take care of their workforce, all kinds of factors that they have been building for a very long time. They're really leaning on to right now. And I think this is the brand leadership question at hand, which is you don't just arrive in a crisis like this and magically have a great brand. This has taken companies decades to build, and brands are actually very slow moving entities, if you will, in terms of their value and their power and the contribution to the company. So those companies that have spent a long time investing and building have really, they're finding themselves in a situation where they can kind of lean onto those brands and use them as vehicles to lead them, their organization through this moment. And at the same time, serve the needs of customers in new ways, exciting ways, innovative ways that they might not have ever even imagined before. So that kind of agility and adaptability is what we've explored and what we're very excited about with this particular report. Next slide, please. So one story that I wanted to share was Colgate-Palmolive. I think if you take a moment to read their most recent investor relations meeting that they had, a quarterly call, Noel Wallace, the CEO, I think did an incredible job of demonstrating exactly what we're talking about. He took this moment and basically stepped back and said, who are we? You know, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. Our culture is really strong, and we believe in the way that we take care of our employees. We have a strategy. We are executing against that, but we recognize that we have to move more quickly. And digitalization of the business is a big part of that. When this all happened, they changed their supply chains in one day to be able to react to customer needs. They changed their SKU volume so that they could get more product into supermarkets that were experiencing really heavy demands for certain things. So that kind of agility is really quite amazing. And the other thing that he did at the same time was really talk about their culture as a company, what values they have. And that is actually, that expression, I think, goes a long way to showing what leadership has done to build Colgate-Palmolive over time and how that actually serves them in this moment, and to what degree you can lean into that and really use it as a vehicle for navigating a really tough situation. So it's a great story, and I recommend looking at that. Next slide, please. So when it comes to like thinking about brands, we look across them in a few areas, and it really boils down to these four areas of culture of innovation, brand management effectiveness, how well a company takes care of its brand in the marketplace, consistency, things of that nature, brand awareness and perception, so how much do they invest in awareness more broadly, and then how they're measured on perceptual attributes in terms of management, reputation, likelihood to invest, those kinds of factors. And then how the culmination of all of that, which we call brand power, how does that actually contribute to a company's value? And so that ranges anywhere from, on average within our index, about 6 to 7%, all the way up to about 22% for companies like Apple and Coca-Cola. So it's exciting to see, that over time, companies are getting more sophisticated about this and understand that this asset, really an intangible asset, does contribute significant value, and it's a slow moving asset, so it actually declines more slowly and grows more slowly. But in a moment like this where you have rapid change, it's an incredible defensive position. Next slide, please. So the area that, these are the top 10 brands, and these are all well-known companies. What we're seeing actually in our most recent data, similar to what you were talking about with consumer confidence, this list is actually shuffling around a little bit right now. But what we're also seeing is that about $100 billion got trimmed off of brand value with these 10 companies just in the past quarter. So it's a huge number. They represent about $650 billion of value. And if you look at our most valuable brands list, which you can read in our report, that is even more extraordinary what companies like Amazon are doing. On that note, Amazon, who's not on this list, I'm sure will be there soon. They've climbed 125 spots on our index within 10 years. So this is a company now that's really asserting itself in terms of building its brand more and more, and doing that in ways that I think no one could have imagined in what they're accomplishing. And so the level of brand power and value that they're creating is quite something. Next slide. And then I think the interesting thing that's happened here, over the past 10 years, brand value actually increased quite rapidly. And it went all the way up to about 37 in our database roughly. And that was actually a milestone. It never reached that for all companies combined and averaged out in the database. And so it was out of the recession, there was a steady rise with markets, and the amount of investment that was going into brands to build these companies, and the rise of these really powerful companies like Facebook and Amazon and Apple's ascent over the years. And so that's really transformed the weighting and brought a lot of brand power to bear. Now, if you go to the next slide, what we actually think will happen into the future, where we started in the poll, it ends up being that we think that the decline that brands are going to face over the next 24 months is going to be unprecedented as well. And I'm of the opinion that the recession, depression almost, that we're actually in right now, if you extracted all the liquidity from the Fed, this is a very serious moment. People are underestimating how deep this might go. And brands are actually going to experience a bit of a crisis as we move through the next couple of years. In companies like the cruise line industry as an example, travel and hospitality, these are industries that are going to be under a lot of pressure for a long time, because the vaccine won't really hit populations for at least another year and a half en masse. And so we expect a decline, but after that happens, we expect a pretty decent rise like what we experienced over the past 10 years. So it's kind of a story, I think, of where we've come as over the history of the index is quite amazing, and what brands have actually become. We see the intangible value rising dramatically, and we see that actually taking a bit of a hit, but then it begins to come back.
So Hampton, brands are important. Thank you for sharing these data with us. And it's really interesting, John, that the brands on the top 10 list that Hampton shared are really old brands. I mean, 100 years old in a lot of cases. Some of them are newer, like Microsoft, but Coca-Cola and others. And yet, John, after all the years at Cisco, you're now investing in startups, and your interest here is keen on the brands of those startups. Talk about how important are brands to startups? How much of what Hampton just presented really relate to the newer companies and the newer brands?
I think brand means a tremendous amount to startups as they start to scale. Typical startups, if you read Jeffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, they focus on the early innovators, the early adopters. You cross the chasm to Main Street, and you begin to build off of it. The image of a startup, often the key brand, is the CEO. And so the CMO's job is to use the CEO as synonymous with the brand. And we rode that horse pretty well at Cisco in terms of positioning. But the other thing with startups is almost all innovation will come from the new startups. And I love the established companies, including the established high-tech companies. But the startups are measured on innovation with a 10, 15-year window of their investors. The large companies are measured on innovation this quarter, this year from the stock market. And so I think you're going to see a fundamental change on how large companies interface to startups and partner together for innovation. And a number of those companies, i.e. 5 of them, I'm seeing my startups work with, because they're looking to the small company to help their brand internally and externally on innovation. So a company will say, I may not be a leader in true artificial intelligence transition, but I am a leader on how I use it with these startups to deliver that to the services of the group. A fundamental change in creativity in terms of the marketplace.
And we're seeing these partnerships more and more as large companies are finding that it's not as easy to innovate in a larger environment than it was in a smaller one. And so the smaller companies are becoming labs. And so these partnerships can help because of funding and resources and obviously exit plans as well. But what you're saying is brands are important regardless of how of the size of your company, and it's really a great thing. Hampton, just a quick question, from one of our attendees. Were these top 100 brands and the top 10 that you showed, was it meant to be the U.S. only data, or is this global?
This is U.S. only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So hopefully that clarifies that. Another question, Chiqui, I want to throw to you from our audience is that one of our audience noticed that some companies are having issues with supply, and then stopped advertising and cut all the marketing. How smart is that?
Not smart at all. Look, you've got to figure out what your message is. And I'm going to pivot just a little from your question, Steve, because I think one of the things that we're seeing is that brand purpose is really driving a lot, and consumers are really tuning into the brand purpose. And so let me just quote from the ANA study: 64% of consumers globally want to change their life to reflect what they've learned as a result of the pandemic, even after it's over. And then 72% said that brands that authentically activate their purpose during the crisis will have a distinct competitive advantage when it ends. Look, supply chain stuff is hard to deal with. And, I think we could do a whole other webinar, Steve, on globalization and where that's going or not going. But I think for brands, the important thing is to really be authentic. Brand purpose has become more important over the last decade than it ever has. And I think the situation with COVID, the pandemic, the social unrest really is going to be a new marker for brands moving forward.
John, I've got another audience question for you. Some universities are being asked to change or divorce themselves from their name due to the current environment. And I think what they're talking about are ties to founders or prominent people who have ties to cultural issues. You see it in the consumer products industry with Aunt Jemima, Mrs. Butterworth, Uncle Ben's, and so forth. What in this world, what should universities, what should these companies do with these old brands that all of a sudden have become problematic?
Well, I'm going to be really controversial here. I think the issue facing the universities is much more complex than that. The universities, I think, have to reinvent their own brand.
Mm-hmm.
You watch what employers want. They want graduates who are able to come in and make a difference immediately. And they want graduates who are no longer trained in silos in engineering, business, law, liberal arts, etc. They want graduates who are focused on the outcomes. And if you want to watch somebody who's going to really shake it up at the university level, and maybe as a startup state, look at West Virginia. We used to be a leading state in so many ways when I was growing up: chemical industry, coal industry, etc., leader in the whole US, and then we fell behind. They are redoing their whole branding curriculum as a university to focus on outcomes. They are focusing on a startup mentality, entrepreneurship required for every student, much like you used to do basics in English or languages, etc. And they're going to transform their definition of success is, do they prepare the students for the jobs and continuous learning facing in front of them, and maybe lead the whole university. So going back to the brand image, I think universities, when people learn they can take online courses, you aren't going to spend $50,000 to take an online course. You're basically going to say, what does the university do that prepares me more for where the market's going? And you talk about an exciting marketing job. That's something that I watch leading universities trying to reinvent themselves.
So Hampton, for those brands or universities or any of these companies that decide that they need a brand change, how do you maintain the brand value from before and link it to the new brand?
Oh, this is tough because a lot of these brands are old heritage institutions, and it ends up being that I think the critical factor right now is that people listen. This is a time for listening and to really understand where people are coming from across, many parts of our society. And so this is it's an important time to listen.
Yeah, and Chiqui, as a multicultural expert here, what's your advice? How do marketers avoid the pitfalls that are out there?
Well, I think relevance is the word that comes to mind. You need to make your brand relevant to your consumer and make sure that you're a must-have. Loyalty, share of wallet, all those things that we marketers talk about. And I think as the census is being taken right now, and we get the results next year, I think once again, you'll see the growth coming from Hispanics and African Americans and Asians. And you as a marketer, you really need to start saying, am I capitalizing on that growth? I know growth is knocked off a little bit for the moment, but growth is going to be the future engine of everybody. And these are the future consumers. The next generation, the next boom is the Latino boom. And I think we have to pay attention to that and make sure we're ready to capitalize on that.
And Steve, just to add one note to that, when an organization changes its name, it's actually easier than people think. It feels really hard to walk up to that change, but changing a brand happens all the time. And within 6 months to a year, people have really moved on and embraced what it is all about. And so the attributes of an organization are what's most important. Its values, its vision for the future. And a name is really a vessel for all the things that those represent. And so I do see that some institutions are going to change their names. That is going to happen. But I think it's actually going to be easier for people than they first imagined.
All right, well, that's going to have to be our last word. Thank you to John, Hampton, and Chiqui for sharing all your knowledge with us today. Please tune in again on August 4th when Chiqui will be moderating a panel on the 2020 census and how its delays may affect marketing plans in 2021. That's August 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern time, so sign up if you have not done already. And again, thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed the webinar, tell all your colleagues and peers about it. And remember to, I'm marketing here, did you notice? Remember to subscribe to our podcast and explore our entire catalog of Conference Board offerings by visiting our website, www.conference-board.org. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Steve Odland, CEO of the Conference Board.